I'm going to show you how to do step number 56. 55 tells you that if you have any mistakes when you were sewing around with your basting stitch, to go back to take those stitches out and to repin and re-sew over where you had a pucker or a pleat. Okay, after you do that, you can then take your pins out again and then double check to make sure that the part that you were trying to fix was actually fixed, that it does look better, that there aren't any puckers or pleats. So before you start number 56, it is important that you look to make sure that your end piece looks good. Okay, so I like to look from the right side of the bag to make sure. Now if you see some little threads like these ones, this is from where you ripped the stitches out if you weren't happy with it. So these are going to be able to be pulled out. You can pull them from the other side, from where your extra stitches were, or you can cut them close to the edge. So if you have threads like this, you can cut it close to the edge. Oh, that one pulled out. Like this, so that you can't see it anymore, and then it will usually fall out from the other side so you can't see it. Make sure that you don't see any puckers or pleats all the way around. If you do, go back to number 55 where it says if you have a pucker or pleat, remove the stitches, adjust the fabric, and then re-stitch that part. Okay, so if everything looks good, which it does on this one, I'm going to move on to 56. '56 says to set the machine at a medium length stitch. So when we were doing your basting stitch, we had to change the stitch length all the way up to 5. A medium length stitch that we've been using for your bags is the default when you turn your sewing machine on. So if you push this button twice again, so it's down to the length, it should say 2.2. If it's up at 5 because you just finished your basting stitch, put it back down so that it gets down to 2.2, or you can turn your machine off and then turn it back on again, and when you turn it on, it'll automatically be at 2.2. It says to, after you set your machine at a medium length stitch, you're going to stitch around your end piece with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you are going to be sewing a 1/2 inch just like you did your basting stitch, but you're going to be sewing right on top of that one. The basting stitch was a really long stitch that isn't meant to stay in for very long. It's a temporary stitch. So you have to sew on top of it to make it so it's going to stay in place. Okay, now you don't have any pins this time, so you're just going to sew exactly the same way where you put your bag in, except this time you don't have pins to worry about. So I'm going to put this in, I'm going to line it up at my 4/8 line on my sewing machine, which should be where I was sewing my basting stitch. And I'm going to pick a spot to start, and I'm going to backstitch, and then I'm going to go start sewing all the way around, staying at the 4/8 line, and being really careful when I go around the curve. So I'm going to leave my needle down so I don't lose my spot. I'm going to close my zipper up so that that stays where I want it to. And I'm going to make sure that I'm kind of holding the fabric back as I go around the curves, because it's a lot harder to take the stitches out now than what they were with the basting stitch. So I'm going to go slowly right on top of the stitches I've already done. And I want to try to make as few wrinkles as I can as I'm sewing around the corners. Okay, I can sew right on top of my webbing just like I did before, the D-rings that were sewn in there. I'm going to sew right across my zipper tape. Make sure to not hit the needle on the metal part of the zipper stop, or else it'll break the needle, but I'm going to sew right underneath it. And I'm going to do the next curve the same way as I did the first one. So I'm going to go slowly, make sure that you don't accidentally sew over your fingers, keep them kind of away from the needle. Okay, and make sure that you're holding the fabric away so that you're not going to sew in extra wrinkles into your bag. go slowly around the corner, holding the fabric back that you don't want to sew. And you're going to sew a straight stitch all the way around to where you started, and then you will back stitch again.